Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is the Student Association of Fire Ecology's Connection webinar series. I'm Matt Behrens. I'm a master's student at Northern Arizona University, where I study prescribed fire at Denali National Park, which is where I'm currently at. I'm also a member of the outgoing National Safe Leadership Team, who's planning this webinar. And I'll make a little plug for potential nominations for officers in just a minute. But this is the fifth of six webinars that we're doing this academic year. And our intent for these webinars really is just to create a forum for students and early career fire ecologists to hear from a diverse group of active and influential speakers, professionals, and just have an open forum for discussion. So I do want to sincerely thank all of you for joining and convey to you that you are in the right place. These webinars are for you, for us. And it's up to us as participants to make these webinars and discussions what we want from them. So before I introduce today's speaker, Stephen, go over a quick couple of housekeeping items. This webinar is already being recorded, and we'll post it to the SAFE website in about a week or so. Following the presentation, Stephen's presentation, we'll have times for some question and answer. So please feel free to add any questions you have either into the chat or see if Stephen's okay with us just piping up while we're going. Can ask, and then I'll be moderating questions and discussion at the end of the presentation if there's definitely a need for that. So I do want to make a plug for an announcement for the National Safe Officer positions, and those nominations are open now, and they're going to be open until March 28th. So if you or anyone you know might be interested in taking an officer role in the next year, that email went out 2 days ago, and actually yesterday. And yeah, we'd love to see those nominations come in. So I do want to introduce our speaker today, Stephen Fillmore. He is a fuels operations specialist for the U.S. Forest Service Region 5, which is California. Recently completed his PhD at University of Idaho, and is kind of at the nexus of academia, research, and also super applied fire management and fuels management, and has a really vast experience in operational fire management and fire suppression. So before I steal too much more of his thunder, which is not possible, I'm going to hand it over to Stephen. We'll get going.
I think there's probably plenty of thunder to share around, Matt. Appreciate that. Yeah, so thanks for the opportunity to talk, and thanks for the introduction, and thank you guys for coming to this talk. I'm excited to do it. I always really enjoy talking to students, especially actually for a variety of reasons. So I put together a little presentation. All I will say right now, like if you wanted to just ditch the presentation entirely and start with questions, I'd be more than happy to do that. But usually people at least want something a little started up. So I'll go through at least a few slides, and unless you guys pop in and stop me. All right, just let me know if this is good to go. Matt, appreciate it.
Yeah,
All right,
good.
All right, cool. All right, so when I got asked to do this, yeah, I wasn't quite sure what to talk about, so I asked the facilitators, the organizers, what they wanted me to talk about, and I actually listened back to some of the other presenters, which, by the way, the people that you have got to talk this year have just been fantastic. Dr. Swetnam and Dr. Knapp and other people like that. So that's really cool. I was really impressed, and to be honest with you, I was like, I don't know that I should be rubbing shoulders with that crowd. So I appreciate it nonetheless, the invite. So it has been an interesting path for me, though. Like Matt said, a lot of my career has been, fire management, but then later, and I'll talk about this more in the presentation, but, went back to get the PhD, and have been ever since sort of trying to blend that. And I think in a lot of ways, my career, I've been trying to blend it anyway, which sort of lent me to going back to school and doing it anyway, and doing that. So I call this a divided path with fire in the middle, which just means, academia on one side, management on the other, and, where those two blend. So I might talk a little bit about that. But let's start from the beginning. I set a couple objectives for this talk. The first one was to kind of meet the intent of the facilitator, I keep saying facilitator, the organizers, to discuss myself, my career, a little bit of my career track, and then just kind of what I just teed up there. And then I offer a chance to stop the presentation at that point. We could do a break. And if there's still no questions, I put together sort of just some advice for students that I've always enjoyed talking to people new in their career and maybe starting out. So I put together just some thoughts. And then if we still don't have any questions, I could continue to the third part, which is just some generalized philosophy about fire, which probably not as valuable, but might be interesting. We'll see how it goes. Point being is like much rather have a conversation. I always do. But I will start with my path. So I originally see, I grew up in Illinois, in Central Illinois, and I'm a graduate of Southern Illinois University, which I always joke is finest forestry school in the nation. I just have to put that plug in there. It is actually a really good program and puts out a lot of good people, especially for a Midwestern state college, really good forestry school. So in '01 is when I graduated with my bachelor's in forest resource management. And then 2003, I actually wasn't really planning on going to grad school at all. But then I got a really good offer to stay for a master's. And so I decided to do that. So I spent another couple years and then did my master's at Southern as well too. Didn't even have to move and managed to get married as well and right as I graduated with my master's. So all right, so that brings me to 2003. And so I went to school for forestry. As I've often told people, I should be a silviculturalist. I should be a forester. I don't know. I should be, cutting down and growing trees and that sort of thing. That's what I was really excited about. So there's always paths in the road as you go along in life, and you're not really sure what they're going to be. You got the straightforward path on the right, which, looks level and clean. And I think that's probably what I had set about doing. When I was 16, I actually applied to Southern to go to forestry school. So I was very clear from a very, like my junior year in high school, that's what I wanted to do. And then all of a sudden, this other path to the left popped up, and that other path has, looks harder, has been harder, I think, in a lot of ways. And for some reason in my career, I seem to have always taken the left harder pathway. So for whatever it's worth. But at the same time, I think, adversity is sometimes leads to better things. So that's what I should have been, but in 2001, like I said, or after I had finished my bachelor's, right when I started my master's program in Southern Illinois, this professor came and started a fire program. It's called the SIU Fire Dogs. It still exists. It's the original Fire Dogs. Um, I had no concept of fire. I didn't grow up with fire. Like I said, I kind of grew up in the cornfields of Illinois, and it wasn't really a thing. And so here's a couple pictures from probably 2001, 2002. And I got hooked on it. I got hooked on going to the burns. I every time we did a burn that we could go to, I went to one. I loved it. My professor, Dr. Ruffner, put the torch in my hand, so I ended up doing a lot of burning. And I got hooked onto it. So you can see some signs of legitimacy here in my pose here. So yeah, you can see that I got really way into it, and fortunately, I managed to find a way into fire and maintain my forestry background. So I'll talk about that a little bit. And here's just a couple of photos. There's actually some people here. So there's a couple people that went on to get their PhDs, a couple people that went on to work in the field. Southern was a good time, and those fire dog days were pretty fun. We had no idea what we were doing, but life called. In 2003, I graduated with my master's. And I was married, and my wife wanted me to get a job, so I put in for, I think it was about 75 federal jobs. There might have been a few state and private jobs in there, but I didn't get any of them. I got rejected by all of them, the ones that even bothered to send me back what used to be a blue card that you'd get in the mail, and it was like the thanks for trying, but no card. Got a little, used to get like stacks of them back. But then it's a long story. I accidentally got a position with the Bureau of Indian Affairs in Riverside, California. Never been to California. Only ever been in the West. I flew into Tucson one time and went down to Mexico, and that was fun. It was actually really fun. But I'd never even been here to California before. And the job I got was an agency fuels officer, which is fantastic because fuels, and you've probably heard this before, you probably know, but fuels is fire and it's forestry together. So it was like the perfect job for me. It's just been amazing ever since. And there's a picture of me at my first desk when I first was starting out. In 2005, though, I decided that I wanted to be a heroic firefighter. And the Bureau of Indian Affairs in California didn't really provide that for a variety of reasons. They don't have their own suppression response. It's mostly contracted out to the Forest Service and Cal Fire. So I decided to get a job with Forest Service and I actually put in for some like engine captain jobs and some other things, but ended up getting a job in South Idaho on the Minidoka district of the Sawtooth. And here's a picture of me. I don't know why I decided to stick my tongue out in front of this pile burn, but I was young and dumb and excited, and those are the pictures that you take when you're that age. And uh, yeah. So anyway, so I was a district fuels officer for about 6 years. It's freaking awesome. I learned a ton. Downside was I had to live in South Idaho for 6 years, which was tough on the family, but really, really good formative years for me to cut my teeth into the Forest Service. It was awesome. I did a lot of good things there. 2010, about 6 years later, there were some life circumstances that needed us to get to somewhere a bit larger, shall we say. So, got a job on the Cleveland National Forest in San Diego, California. So went back to California and was there for a long time. It was a different job. You're more of a subject matter expert at that point. Although I got to do quite a bit of application and continue to develop my skills and started working with incident management teams and actually really liked that forest job because it was a mix of going to the field, it was a mix of the office. You kind of do whatever you wanted each day and then develop and provided me a lot of opportunity to provide training as well to people. So it was cool. It was really good learning time. So did that for a while, like 12 years, and then decided that 12 years is enough for any job, honestly, and it was time for some new blood. So I moved up to the regional office, stayed in San Diego, but now I'm the regional fuels ops specialist. So that's four fuels positions in a row. It's all I've ever done is fuels. It's the same thing. Oh, I guess I forgot to drop that, but it's still the same thing. It's like as you're basically just a subject matter expertise. I kind of call it the fuels help desk. So I'm still heavily involved with incident management teams and large fire management and that sort of thing, but not like initial attacking fires anymore or anything like that. So yeah, so that's my career track for that. So it's been what I think 22 years or so. So I kind of thought to myself, what have I done in 22 years? And here's my list. I've been actually like a lot of different places. It's been pretty cool in the country. I got to see a lot of veg types, how fire burns in them. Got to meet a lot of good people, a lot of good friends. Learned a lot. Rivals. If you guys don't have a rival or understand the concept of a rival, you should definitely learn the concept of a rival because it's not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. Like there are several people in the regional office or in California that I consider my rivals professionally and respectfully. And what they do is they keep you honest. So get a rival, but not an enemy. And as far as I know, I don't have any enemies, but sometimes you don't know who your enemies are or made any. I handled stuff and I haven't killed anybody. And if you work in fire for a while, that actually becomes something that you kind of keep track of is, you haven't led anybody to be seriously injured, although there's been plenty of people injured. And then I've got a whole grip of qualifications as well too, which the only point I bring this up is that, there's just been a lot of opportunity to develop myself over these years from NWCG fire qualification standpoint. And, every single one of those is a process, 2 or 3 years to get through it and learning and that sort of thing. And then, of course, the education, which we'll talk a little bit about more. And then, like, you got to take a ton of NWCG classes to get all those qualifications. And it's a lot, anywhere between 2, 3 days to a week or longer sometimes for each one of these classes. So, yeah. So it's been a cool career so far. But what am I proudest of? Actually, I need to minimize this. And this is going to be a theme that maybe you start to see over the course of this, but the things that I'm proudest of are not really my accomplishments per se, because everybody follows if you stay in the government long enough, you're going to develop a very similar list to um, that I have. But some of the cool things that I'm happy about is when I was in Idaho, I managed to convince my ranger to allow me to start a fuels crew, which was cool. We called it the Cache Peak Fuels Module. Got to see what goes into hiring 6 temporary seasonal employees and buying all the equipment that you need for it and branding, and man, it was really cool. I only got to do it for a couple years until I ended up moving on, but really, really cool. Enjoyed that quite a bit. Then when I moved on to the Cleveland, one of the things I did just a few years into doing it was I created this thing called what I called the Cleveland Fuels Leadership Curriculum. And that was, I kind of modeled it off a college class, and I took just like 15 people off to Cleveland, and ended up expanding to other people, and just built like kind of like a college course for fuels. Because one of the things about fuels is when I started, which will be the first of many me sounding old statements, but when I started, there was no fuels management courses back in the early 2000s. It was just what you could draw on from forestry. And a lot of the people of my um, generation or whatever will say the same thing, is we kind of had to just teach it ourselves. And I'm like, this is complete BS. Like, we should teach people how to do it. So that's what the fuels leadership curriculum was for. And then what that did is that expanded to the Angeles and San Bernardino, the Tahoe, the last, and in a couple other places, and then eventually actually led right into the National Fuels Academy, which is going on right now. So they kind of pirated my curriculum and then are using it now for the national curriculum. I think it's just cool, it's awesome. And then got to write the hazard pay for prescribed fire proposal, and got to work with the WO as my first project, where got to work at that level, working with OPM, working with the Washington office and partners in the DOI. Fortunately, ended up being someone with the DOI that I knew and I was already friends with. But that was really cool because that's something I can give back. We prescribed fire hazard pay has always been something that everyone's like, you'll never see that in your career. And then hopefully it should be coming soon. And then just mentoring people and seeing other people succeed. Like, you really get to a point where that is where your satisfaction is not necessarily in your own successes, but in seeing other people develop. I've many people that I brought in that as a GS5, and now they're like GS11 fuels planners. And I think it's just so cool to see them, and they're doing such a better job than I ever did, I think. So, and then for me personally, putting fire on the ground, whether it be prescribed fire or wildfire, whatever the avenue is something I believe very strongly in, because of my ethic in, natural resource management and fire specifically. That's been the specialty that I have followed, is being someone that knows how to put fire on the ground, knows how to manage people who are putting fire on the ground, and doing it in a way that's, effective for meeting objectives in the long term. So those, I would say, are the things that I am the proudest of in my career. I got to keep moving you guys around here. So I do want to say though, so I've worked for the feds my whole time. Not everybody has to work for feds, but why work for the feds? I like to go through this, and I say hopefully this ages well, because there's a lot of things changing pretty significantly right now, and I almost kind of wonder how long this is going to be relevant still. But I think some of these hold true. So if and when you ever work for the federal government, in a federal land management position, biggest thing is the scale. I like to work on big problems. I'm okay with that. I want to do that. And the feds give you a big canvas. The Forest Service alone is like 193 million acres just in the national forest system. So almost anywhere you work, you're going to have a bigger landmass than you could ever possibly do, even if you spent your entire career just working on one district. Like, you'll never get it all done. And then everything else that applies to it, whether it be wildfire management or whatever. So big problem, big canvas. Access, you get to, I've never wanted to take like a state job or whatever, because, it just seemed like, it's kind of narrow. I like a wide network of influence, and, the things that you do, even working at the forest, working at the region, you can work on these national issues. Like, so for instance, like the prescribed fire hazard pay thing, that's something that has a wide influence, and it's cool to be able to work on that. The work itself, I think I kind of already described this, but I really like the work that you can do on as a land management agency. It's why people who go to get forestry degrees, they want to go work on large land bases and wildfire within that. And then for me, the people, again, I think this is a theme that you'll see is, I really have enjoyed the people. The people that do this work are just fantastic. I mean, really. And this is again part of the reason why I like to talk to students so much, is because I kind of see that enthusiasm that, I'm not saying I don't have anymore, but like it's harder to hang on to it with time. And I love seeing students come in and going to conferences and just seeing that group of people. I really enjoy it. And then you can band together over problems. And it's where my passion has been. Like I said, some changes are coming, and maybe we can talk about that later if you want. I don't really want to dwell on that too much, because we're not really talking about that right now. But I got to back up a little bit. So I went through my professional career, like from like what my real job is. But back in 2016, 2017, I decided I wanted to go back to school, or to go back and get the PhD. It was kind of it's one of the goals I had, I guess, just professionally. and I was able to. So if the door is open, this is a lesson for life. If someone is opening a door for you, and you think it might lead you to something good, go ahead and go through it. But the reason I wanted to do it is because, well, I'll talk about that a little bit. So back up a little bit more, and this is again where some of my professional ethic comes from. And I know some of you guys have heard this story already, but back in 2006, after I started working for the Forest Service, I was out there slaying the dragon, fighting fire, being stupid, doing all the things that you do when you're earlier in your career. But after a while, I started to be on fires where I'm like, wait a second. I am actually supposed to be a land management professional here. I know that we're supposed to apply fire on the ground. And there just started to be this kind of like discordant, um, I don't know, sort of notion in my head where it's just like, well, we're putting all these fires out, but we know we need to put fire on the ground and why. And this is like a well-known thing in the literature and you guys are even well versed on it, but it wasn't talked about as much back then, which is like everyone knows that we need to put fire on the ground, right? So this started for me what I call a long arc of believing that fire was going to be the answer. And then I had a bunch of experiences on fire use fires or fires that could have been fire use fires or managed fires or whatever you want to call them, other than full suppression fires. Until I was out as a Type 3 IC in Oregon, and there's this fire called the 406 fire. And it was this just perfect fire. It started at the top of a ridge. It had this watershed, it had real good natural boundaries. They wanted to manage fires. I spent all night working on a presentation to go and present this plan to the powers that be at the supervisor's office, and it was denied, which is fine, whatever. And it's funny too. You don't need to like create a big presentation to go put out a fire, but you put together a big presentation to manage a fire, do something other than full suppression on it. So that was really instructive to me. So I drove back from Oregon at the end of that assignment, and I started thinking about that experience and how I was kind of tired of dealing with that constantly and always the answer being no, and why is the answer no? And so that was the genesis of me going back for a PhD program because I figured that would be a pretty good project to work on is try to answer for myself and maybe other people. Why is that answer no? Why is it so easy to say no to managing a fire and so easy to say yes to putting it out? So anyway, so I'll talk a little bit about, I guess, my research. I know that the other presenters mostly just did a research presentation, and I just decided I really didn't want to do that. If you guys want to see my research, I'm more than happy to talk about it in great detail. And there's probably some recordings of it out there, but I will touch on it just real briefly in the continued context of what we're talking about here. So for my master's project, as I said, I should be a silviculturalist. I did a whole master's project on post-surface mining reclamation, which was actually pretty interesting. Did it in southwestern Indiana, took a bunch of plots, got to see some really cool machines and see what strip mining looks like. And so that's like my earlier body of research, and it's actually pretty well cited for a lot of for people that are for doing that sort of thing. But that was my master's, and you don't want to talk about that. Anyway, so my PhD research efforts totally different. Again, I guess the setup for it is that I saw that it was not the environmental factors of the fire as much as it was the human factors. And so I decided I really wanted to follow a social science path. So I went back and got a social science degree. I followed a social science path, and I consider myself a social scientist now. And again, driven by this simple question, why we know that we need to reintroduce more fire into the ecosystem. So why are we not doing it? Why are we not doing it? I still think I know the answer, but I'm not satisfied with it. And the priors that I went into with this degree was that I knew it was a problem almost entirely driven by humans. It was just people not wanting to say yes. And I knew it was going to be complicated. And again, I wanted to focus the context of all my research that I was going to do in this program on that application of fire. So for my dissertation, I came out with three papers. The first one's 2021. It's called Mixed Methods Lit Review. And in that paper, it's cool. I just went to I looked up literally thousands of papers and filtered for them and ended up finding something like, I can't remember, 25 papers that specifically talked about the decision making associated with managed fire. And it spanned all the gamut. It was like from the 50s all the way up till recently, or actually probably more like the 70s all the way up to fairly recently, actually all the way up to 2009. After that, I did a paper about WFDS, Wildland Fire Decision Support System, which was a follow on some research that some other people had done. But then I added a few questions specifically asking them about how do they use WFDS for, making managed fire decision making. And then the last paper was, I think, the best paper, and it was the factors paper. And that's where I came up with, well, the first paper I developed this framework in these 6 key theme areas, which I actually do want to talk about because I think this is important. And I've seen other people sort of scratch at this and try, but I believe that any wildfire decision can be placed into one of these 6 categories. So operational, institutional, which is kind of like internal cultural, socio-political, which is the external factors, the perception of risk, what the outcomes are going to be, and what the fire environment is. And for what it's worth, I think you can pretty much couch most decisions within one of those. And then I found a whole bunch of factors, more than 100. The first one was like 110, the second one was like 140 individual decision factors that were barriers or facilitators. And um, yeah, and in the end, really the upshot was that I found that the culture, as we kind of knew cultures that we have is one of risk avoidance. People just want to avoid the risk, and until that changes, nothing really will. And if you really wanted to read my entire dissertation, that's probably what you would come out with it, is that we have not properly incentivized our decision makers to get past that risk avoidance. And yeah, and there isn't really a clear pathway to doing so. Some people could say there's a change the policy, but the fact is our policy right now is perfectly adequate, and people could be making that decision. So a lot of it just comes down to a decision maker feeling strongly enough about it to actually go ahead and say yes. So anyway, this is just real quick that decision framework, which I think is cool. So in the middle is the decision. You got the 6 key factors around it. And they all feed into the decision. So, you imagine a decision maker in the middle kind of thinking about, oh, this and that and this and that and this and that, all these like 100 some factors. And in the middle, you get to a final decision. How that happens is a little bit of a black box because it is human decision making. It just whatever led to that person to weigh those things on balance. That's how you get to a final decision. So, and I could probably talk more about this. So if we wanted to some other time. All right, so incorporating science into management. I'm trying to adhere a little bit to what I'm supposed to be talking about, which is trying to blend the management side and the science side. And to be honest with you, I don't know how well I've really done this yet. I will say on the one hand, it's only been a few years since I got my PhD, and so there hasn't been a lot of opportunity. But the other thing is, and there have been some successes for instance, one of the things that we're doing in Region 5, I was able to do is I actually took my research, took those key theme areas, and built what's called a risk sharing dialogue. So say you have manager X on a forest has a candidate fire that they want to manage. Well, what we did is we built this process for them to have a structured risk sharing dialogue between themselves, the geographic area coordination centers like the dispatch centers, and the regional staff. And the purpose of that is to get everybody on board, because what I saw was that you had all these forest decision makers that were like, well, I want to do this, but I don't know if I'm going to get the support. I don't know if the GAC's going to send me, engines or crews and the things that I need, or are they going to pull it? I don't know if the regional office is going to support me if something goes wrong. So if you think about it from a sociological standpoint, if you have all these people that are agreeing that this is what they're going to do, they're going to be bought into it and they're going to want to see it succeed, and they're not just going to bail on it. So that is something we have actually in our wildfire preparedness plan in Region 5 now. And I actually don't think we're going to be managing fires for the next 4 years, but it's there as a process, and I feel good about it. And that is a direct sort of science into management thing. I'm looking for others, but it's not easy, which is why you see this divide between science and management so much, because it's really hard to apply a lot of things sometimes. Biological principles, you can get best management practices, and it's not like it can't be done, but it really is difficult when you actually try to do it. One good example I can think of from my career is when I was back in Idaho, is it started to get interested in aspen regeneration, and I actually went to an aspen restoration conference down in I think it was in Provo or Logan or something, and it was cool. I got a lot of really good ideas. I came back, and then I actually was like writing NEPA and writing project designs, and as a result of that, came up with some kind of innovative ways of dumping slash in the fall letting it cure in the winter and burning it really hot in the spring, which left the bulls residual because you had to deal with the herbivory. In other words, you create all this new aspen, but then the moose and the deer and the elk and the cows would just come in. But if you left all that heavy deadened down in there, they literally couldn't access it. So, I felt like that was a kind of a science blended thing. Anyway, so Dr. Eric Knapp, gave a presentation, I think last week or whenever that was, that he envies the fire experience. But it's really interesting because you have all this, say maybe my 20 some years of management. Well, I envy a lot of the academic experience that people has, and he has that academic experience, and they envy the management. I talked to this guy named Wesley Page, Dr. Page, who works for the fire lab now. I told him I wanted to go back. He was a fuels tech at the time, but he just finished his PhD. And I told him I was going to go back and try to go back to school. And he straight up told me, he's like, I don't think you can do both. He said, you can't be good at both. In other words, you can't be a good scientist and you can't be a good fire manager at the same time, or fuels manager. And that has and still haunts me to this day. I don't know if you really can do both, but you know what? I did it anyway, Wesley. But it still haunts me. Anyway, so what are some things I've learned after a career spent in fuels and then starting academia for real the last few years? I do believe fuels management needs to change our approach, and that is a broad statement, but I think fuels has just been doing the same thing for, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 years in a lot of ways. We're cutting fuel breaks, we're doing this, we're doing that. We're putting in prescribed fire where we can, but it's not always the best places. It doesn't always make the most sense, and there's no maintenance to it a lot of times. So what I really think we need to do, and I think other people recognize this. You see this in the fire sheds registry, and even the wildfire crisis strategy kind of started to get at this, which is like, let's actually prioritize where we want to get the work done. I still don't think we're anywhere near where we need to be, but we actually need to start prioritizing. Like, this is where we want a project. We want this fuels project, this vegetation management um, polygon or whatever on this landscape forever. And then this is how we're going to do it. This is what we want it to look like. This is what we want it to do. And this is how we're going to maintain it, forever, ostensibly. And then another thing that we do not do a very good job with, but I've seen a lot of improvement over my career, is integrating with communities. There's this notion when I first started, it's just basically we take care of everything on our side of the fence and then the communities would be fine. But then we kept continuing to, burn down communities or have losses or whatever. And then we started, we even when I started on the Cleveland, we'd put in these fuel breaks, and because our, say, property boundary was halfway up a hill, we'd cut that fuel break, halfway up a hill, which operationally, if you know anything about firefighting, you're not going to put a fire line halfway up a hill. You just kind of have overslung or underslung line there. So we finally started to work with the communities and start bringing those boundaries right next to the private property boundaries where they need to be. They need to be adjacent to those communities and work with those fire safe councils. And the reason we don't do that is because it's hard, because people are hard. People have different incentives and motivations, and maybe they don't want that 100-foot swath cut behind their house, even though it might save their house. Which there's a lot of research that dictate that, some people just are like playing the odds. They're like, well, a fire doesn't happen every year. I've lived here for 30 years and there's never been a fire, and I'm probably going to die before there ever is a fire. So they don't want to cut their trees down or thin around their house or whatever. And you have to, this is something that Sarah McCaffrey taught me, is you have to respect that. Just because you think it's the most important thing because that's your profession doesn't mean it's the most important thing to the person. But anyway, I'm getting off topic here. We need to integrate with the communities more, I think. And then, yeah, wildfire, I think really is the real answer. So for at scale, like, we are never ever going to do prescribed fire at the scale that we need to do. Like, of all the prescribed fire I've laid down in my life, in my career, um, I've probably burned in one afternoon on a wildfire, every acre, more than, every acre I've burned. Now, the prescribed fire, I do think there's a role for it, but I think it needs to be, those back to the prioritized areas, strategic areas next to communities, fuel breaks, and that sort of thing. So, but to get the real work done on the landscape, I have become convinced that it actually needs to happen during wildfires. So, all right, here's the off ramp at the first break. I'm actually gonna, I don't know, see, I'm gonna bring up the people here. Because there's nothing but advice after this. It's just Dad giving you some advice. So we want to stop and maybe to start taking some questions, or do you guys want to hear my sagely dad advice? Andrew, or am I sorry, Matt, are you facilitating?
No, Andrew can ask questions. He's allowed.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt. I'm really struggling. Yeah, okay. Not to make a joke. So Stephen,
Yeah.
your presentations rock. They're very personable. Thank you for doing this. I think the most interesting part about this, what you just said, it's like the managers using science. Um, 'Cause this is AFE. Like
Yeah.
this is for an AFE, students affiliated with AFE, um, which is fire ecology. It's a lot of researchers. It's some managers, but it's a lot of researchers. So like what's the real nexus there? And like how can managers actually be supportive, and like what's the true uptake of science like for managers? Because we've we've known what we needed to do for a while, and like our folks like this latest field treatment paper finally shows me enough evidence that field treatments work at the stand scale. So like we're really gonna do this now. Um and not that I think you have an answer, but like how can researchers truly be helpful, and like what's the best path forward for people who do want to be helpful?
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a good question, and it's a question that people have struggled with for a long time. I don't have a great answer because I mean, so like the real, like the answer that you're supposed to say is, well, scientists are supposed to, give presentations and do tech transfer and write reports and then um, provide it in a palatable way. I mean, I know people like co-production and that kind of has I'm trying not to call it a fad because I think Matt actually talked about doing some earlier, but it's difficult to do co-production and to like blend science and managers together because it's different agendas, it's different timelines, it's different time frames. That being said, that's actually what I think the answer is we need to actually find a way for managers to come over to the science side more and scientists to come more over to the manager side. And people, I've heard different solutions over the years. I've heard solutions like, break up the research stations and put people out on forests, or maybe like, take 4 or 5 scientists and zone them for 4 or 5 forests and that sort of thing. I think all of those are good answers. It's just nobody's ever done anything like that. What I actually believe the answer is, I think scientists are doing just fine job, honestly. Um, they do a shit ton of presentations, webinars, tech notes. I mean, it's all available. And so for me personally, like part of the reason why I went back to the PhD program is because I have always enjoyed reading science and being a part of science. And I think that as a professional land manager, like you have to do that. So I actually think this might sound kind of weird, but I actually think most of the onus is actually on the manager to go find the science for the thing that you're doing. I actually think most our researchers are doing a fantastic job of making it available, and we have people like Nahalem or whatever. That's a tech transfer specialist or a science delivery specialist. Those kind of people. And if you're good at being a science communicator, like go try to get one of those jobs because that's a pretty good blending. But then you're not either doing science or management. So I'll leave it at that. But I think that's the answer is for managers actually to just do a better job of going and reading the science and making themselves aware of it. I did it. It can be done.
Can I ask a
End of report.
follow-up?
Yeah, sure.
How helpful are decision support tools then that integrate science and then give folks
Give me an example of a decision support tool.
like the interagency field treatment decision support system, or
Gotcha.
WFDS, like there's a Forces, I think, is
Okay.
more of a
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I got you. Thanks for, I wasn't sure if that's what you were talking about because there's all kinds of things out there. Well, one of the things I found in my WFDS research was actually the main takeaway from the WFDS is not a decision support tool, it's a decision validation tool. Most managers just already know what they want to do, either correctly or erroneously, whatever. And then they use tools like WFDS to just go validate in paper or on paper what they've already decided. Very few people use them the way that they should be used, which is sort of this a priori approach where you don't have a decision already made. I do think IFTDIS is actually coming along really well. It's the Interagency Fuels Treatment Decision Support something service system system things. You can actually build burn plans in it now. So even that I wouldn't necessarily call a decision support tool. It's really more of like it's just a tool. It's like a process assistance tool. And what it's doing is it's making those tools available to people because like, dude, when I first started, like if you even had a behavior on in your burn plans that you're doing great, but now sort of the expectation is like spatial based fire behavior modeling outputs and things like that. I don't even know how to do anymore. That's becoming more of the standard, which is fantastic. But the only way we're doing that is because people have gone in there and built these programs to help you. So that's my answer. Yeah, I think they're good. I think they're good for the most part. There's a lot of tools, and sometimes it's just a researcher or somebody wanted to put one together. I've built them too, like I've gotten some things out there. I don't know. All right. So where are we at? Is there more questions, or am I gonna start sounding like an old guy and giving advice? What do you guys want to do?
Stephen, I really appreciate like you are uniquely positioned to be able to say what you did about maybe the science community doing a good enough job,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and that the onus being on managers to make that last kind of half step to meet, and then everyone continue to work together. So I don't know. I just appreciate you hearing that because there really isn't anyone I've talked to who I think can genuinely say that. Yeah.
Good. Good. Glad that resonates. All right. Am I going back to the presentation? Is that what we're doing? Giving you guys every chance in the world here to not have more PowerPoint. All right, fine.
Wait. We can.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right.
At the risk of getting a little too specific, but I'm really interested in that comment you made about figuring out ways to burn, frankly, high severity fires
Yeah.
stand change from and like a state change of these forests. And how do you sell that? How do if you found evidence for it, like even in that experimental setup, like how do you sell that to managers and communities to justify kind of scorching the ground on purpose, and making a big change that takes 30 years to take effect, like to kind of see itself through?
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually such a good question. I'm glad you asked that. Uh, I've thought about this one a lot. So one of the things I think we've done as a disservice to ourselves as land managers is we've held up this low intensity ponderosa pine sort of archetype as like that's what we need to be doing. When the reality is like that is actually an extremely limited case of the use of fire, and it's great in the ponderosa pine because that's what it's supposed to doing. But if you actually look at the fire regimes, the 5 fire regimes, I think they're the hardy ones. I think it's three. Yeah, 3 of 5 are actually high severity fire regimes, and the fourth is a mixed severity fire regime. So what I tell people and try to remind people is that basically 3.5 out of the 5 fire regimes are supposed to be stand replacing high severity, mostly high intensity fire regime. So that is what is natural. Now, that doesn't necessarily going to convince people unto itself, but what it does is it reminds people like this is actually, if you're looking for a natural state, that's actually what we're going for. And so, I think of it in the context of maybe telling a manager or an agency administrator is like, no, this is actually what you need to do. We need to burn off this lodgepole pine because it's 80 years old and it's the only way it's going to regenerate, or aspen, or chaparral, or grass is technically high severity, because it burns completely. So it's mostly what is fire. That low intensity frequent fire regime is not that common across the states if you look at it holistically for what it's worth. So I think it's about the best way I can answer that question. It's the way I've approached it and thought about it myself.
Do you think there's a potential to hit like a critical point, like an inflection point where there has been enough of that more natural state of fire on the ground where the public generally accepts it, and then that just translates into like I don't
Yeah.
know. People, the perception of a burned area still is negative unless you're an
It-
elk hunter and you know specifically why you like it.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah, I don't know when that would change socially.
So I'll put my social scientist hat on right now because the reality is we do ourselves a disservice most of the time because we as managers, and you guys get taught this as students, are taught that the public does not approve of high fire severity or burned areas and this and that. And it's actually not really supported by facts. Most of the time, if you actually dig into the research, what the papers say about public perception is that they just want to know that you know what you're doing. They just want to know that a professional is in charge and that if it looks like this and you can communicate with them, you don't have to convince them. And it isn't necessarily even a matter of education a lot of times. It's just a matter of explaining to them that this is actually what it's supposed to look like and we know what we're doing and these are my credentials and my credibility. Because most of the time, all the public wants to know is that somebody competent is in charge. So that is actually how you have to frame it to people. You don't convince them that a black spot is a good thing. You convince them that you know what you're doing, and that black spot is a result of the fact that you know what you're doing. Do you see the difference in that framing?
Yeah.
And that is an important difference, and we do a terrible job of teaching it to our firefighters, to our students, to everybody. Because if you actually look into the research, like the public just wants to know that the lands are in good hands, you know? That's mostly the upshot, and most people are educated in the states as well too, and they know. And frankly, a lot of people that aren't educated have street smarts, and they know the difference between BS and not BS. So being transparent with people in this as well too is extremely important. All right, that's a great question though. Okay, where are we at? Any other questions? Or we got like 10 minutes left?
We do have 10 minutes left. We can do whatever you think would make sense. We can stop the conversation here if no one else has questions, or if you've got anything you do want to share, but I'll leave that up to you.
All right. Well, let me tell you what. I'll go back to the advice thing, I guess, then, unless anybody wants to stop me for a question. And I can't tell if there are any, so Matt, just tell me if there are any.
Deal.
All right, so off ramp. So I'm gonna mind my time here, maybe spend 5 minutes. All right, so I'm gonna give you some advice for when you're first starting out, because I think most of you guys are students. So when you're first starting out, just remember that your first year will take forever, and then it'll go very, very, very fast. And don't get impatient. Take all the training that you can. I'm kind of skipping past the things I want to talk more about. Actually, this is really important. Take all the training that you can because what you need to do your first like 5 years or so is you need to make yourself valuable. Because to be honest with you, you're not going to be all that valuable the first few years. So take all the training, do all the things, learn as much as you possibly can. Um, and when you're first starting out, embrace what you don't know and then go learn about it. And this is something that I really enjoyed. I actually kind of missed those first 5, 6, 7 years. It was like, okay, I don't know about water handling. I mean, I literally can remember times where I was sitting at home late, like 9 o'clock at night with the freaking water handling guide just because I wanted to learn about friction loss and like things like that, which is dorky, but like I was way into it then. And you can do this about anything. There are books and papers and but don't pretend like you know it. Just and figure it out on your own because autodidactic learning is always going to get you further. And just keep in mind your first 5 years or so of your job, your only job is to listen, learn, and follow orders. Nobody really expects that much out of you. You get a pass for that long. After about 5 years, people actually expect you to know something. This is my opinion. So take advantage of that time because after that time, you don't get to say, I don't know. Um, but the first 5 years or so, yeah, just learn and make mistakes. This is a mistake I made. I was driving a fire engine and I ran over a curb and I bent the rim. I was super embarrassed about it, but I never cut the corner again. That photo in the background. And here's another thing you got to remember. I remember learning this like within my first month or so. is your diploma is awesome. Congratulations on getting it. It doesn't mean anything after about day one. So take your diploma, put it in the drawer, and start learning things at that point because your field experience will always matter more in the long run. Getting a degree is what you need to do for a lot of jobs, but it really is just the thing that gets you in the door. It's your baseline. It gives you the ability to talk fluently with people without the actual experience behind you. But take that diploma and immediately, just don't worry about it. And just remember that it took me a lot longer, as I like to say, to get my type 2 burn boss than it did my PhD because, and a lot more work as well, too, that field time and those things that you learn experientially, they take a long time. As Chris, who I see is on here now, said, you get about 1 year of experience in a year. So try to get as much experience as you can in that year. And then this is something I did want to share for getting help long term. Find a mentor as soon as possible because believe me, you need one. You don't know as much about things as you think you do. I know first going off into it out of college, you feel real proud of yourself and all that sort of thing, and you should be, but things get really complicated in a hurry, especially when it comes to policy and budget and life in general. As I say here, it's absurdly complicated. So get a mentor and then become one as soon as you feel you can, because that's the way you pay it back. So I have been extremely blessed. I've had more than this, but these are probably my four main mentors I had. The first person that hired me into service is Lisa Northrup. She gave me some really good advice. Literally on my first, and I've told other people this, but literally on my first day of work, I walked in, she showed me a map and she said, now you got to be patient. And I'll always remember that, 22 years later, she said, just be patient. She's now an associate deputy chief of the Forest Service. Chris Shank here, who's on the call, I see, was probably really one of my most formative mentors. Worked for him in Idaho, and I can't, and like I still can quote him pretty much every day for the things that he taught me. But he believed a lot in me as well too, during some difficult times in my life as well, and just taught me about how to be a firefighter, a real firefighter for the Forest Service, what it takes, what a professional looks like, how to dress, act, talk, all those things. So I'm always indebted to him for that. Moving on, this is next picture is a picture of myself and Neil Sugahara, Dr. Sugahara, who's the one that told me and gave me the confidence to actually start a PhD program and told me that it would be worth doing it. And he was a regional fire ecologist in California. And then Sarah McCaffrey really helped me through my PhD program and enabled me to become a social scientist. So anyway, the point being is you got to find a mentor and, they'll change over time, adapt to your needs, but it's extremely important. So that's the main one I wanted to say. Take a lot of photos and organize them because you're going to want those photos and also helps you make good PowerPoint presentations later. Every single one of those photos is 15-minute story. And then have somebody take photos of you. Like, don't be ashamed. Like, be like, hey, can you please take a photo of me? And because these are probably the only, there might be a couple others, like in my entire career of somebody else taking a photo of me that I actually have. You're going to want that and send something, not like that's a selfie. And it might sound silly, but later this will make sense. It's important. You want to be able to show these things. Yeah, keep your mind open to opportunities, and then finally relationships. You got to build a network. Don't be afraid to ask for people for help. Don't forget to help when asked. And it is way too small a world to be an asshole, especially in fire. So just be nice to everyone you possibly can. This is my fire helmet, probably 15, 16 years ago. I decided to put this on the back of my helmet, and still, as you ever find me, it's on the back of my helmet. And it's just a reminder to me that what you say and what you do is what people will judge you on and people will evaluate on. So just always remember the things that you say and always remember the things that you do. And then at the end, the most valuable resource, and this sounds cheesy, but it really is the people. All my best stories, all my best things that I can remember about this career have not been about this fire or that fire. It's been about the person or the people or the group of people. Then you lose people along the way. There's a couple people on here that on this photo that aren't with us anymore, and you never know when those people are going to go. So just be nice to everyone and enjoy the people that are out there because most people enjoy what you're doing here. So, all right, that's it. Oh, that's a different presentation. Stop share. You guys still here? All right, that's it. I'm not going to lecture anymore.
Thanks, Stephen. I'm glad you did that a little bit.
All right. Thanks, man.
Those are some good photos.
There's a lot of good photos.
And they mean a lot. And, anyone who shares, yeah, I don't know. I had a lot of FMOs share photos like that, and I know they mean a lot. And I know I'm accruing those as well. So it's
Yeah,
cool to know that.
absolutely. So,
Well, unless anyone has any questions, we'll give an awkward pause for that. And then I think we'll wrap things up.
good with that. Well, thanks for the opportunity to give this talk. I appreciate you guys inviting me.
Thanks, Stephen.
Yeah, it was great to meet you.
Yeah, too. Wish I was out there digging soil pits with you or whatever in Alaska. Sounds fun.
No, you don't. I'm currently digging soil pits through mineral soil with the Pulaski all day because it's frozen.
Yeah, that sounds fun. I actually had a soil scientist I worked with on the Cleveland who, as a mitigation, wanted us to dig a circle, like dig down like 8 inches of the dirt, pile it over to the side, put the pile in that hole, and then burn, and then put the soil back, which is hilarious because it goes back to my master's, the surface mine reclamation, is that it destroys the soil to do that. I was like, how do you not know that? Anyway, I thought that was funny. So don't ever recommend stuff like that.
Nope. Nope. Yeah, I'm trying to, Stephen, I am definitely interested in like a lot of the social science and the ethics kind of stuff that you've brought up. And I haven't thought a whole lot about that. I'm definitely coming at it from an ecologist perspective.
Sure.
And I'll reach out when those kind of crystallize a little more.
Yeah. Yeah, happy to.
Because that is where the rubber meets the road.
Well, that was the last, like the third part of the presentation was just like a photos of different books, and it's like the point I would make is that everyone comes at fire with a different lensing, you know. If you're a fire ecologist, you know, you look at everything through a fire ecology lens, social scientists, and on down the road. But really, what we need to be doing is looking at it holistically, because fire is really all of those things. And so, the more that you can sort of be well-rounded and incorporate all those different ways of looking at fire and how we juxtapose, the better manager you'll be. Yeah. Anyway, all right.
Hey, oh, go ahead.
I can't resist. I need to tell the younger people that everything that Stephen said is true. And I appreciate the chance to be involved with Stephen. Sorry, our contingency from Texas is either busy fighting fires or lighting fires today, which it's actually possible to do both in the same state.
Yeah,
and I got to take a call now.
He's a busy man. See you, Chris. All right.
All right. Thanks, Stephen.
All right. See you guys later.